we have an opportunity today to talk with somebody that's new to me and you both, and probably new to the audience that will see this segment or these segments that we put out. Let me introduce, or how about you, Steve? You want to introduce Dr. Edlin Veras?
Sure. I
think I just did it.
You got it started.
Hey everybody, Ulysses Slaughter here with the Chester Housing Authority's Building Community. This is our platform for keeping in touch with our residents, our community stakeholders, anybody who cares about the Chester Housing Authority. This is the place to be if you want to know what's going on. And me and Steve Fischer, who is with me right now, we like to talk about interesting things: housing, voting, history. We like to talk about it all. And today, Steve, we're going to be asking the question, why do we need Black History Month? Now, I got to say something. When you asked that question a little while ago, you actually put an emphasis on month.
Right.
And I had actually thought about this as, why do we need Black history? And then when you said it, it was, why do we need Black History Month?
Yeah. And the reason I did that was because I saw you wrote, why do we need Black history in the build up to this?
Yes.
And I thought it was missing a word.
It was.
Because, history is history. We need it. We have it, whether we like it or not. History just happens. But I thought the reason we were doing this now was because of its relationship to this particular month.
And we have an opportunity today to talk with somebody that's new to me and you both, and probably new to the audience that will see this segment or these segments that we put out. Let me introduce, or how about you, Steve? You want to introduce Dr. Edlin Veras?
Sure.
I think I just did it.
You got it started. Dr. Veras has been, I think he's now in his second year at Swarthmore College. He comes highly recommended. We've had a chance to see some of his work, thanks to the magic of social media, and thought that given his youthful appearance and his big smile, that a lot of our friends here in Chester might like an introduction to him as well, particularly the residents that we work with through the Housing Authority. Another thing we were talking about earlier before we got started here was that the very strong connection that the Housing Authority and Swarthmore College have had over quite a few years now. And what has been particularly satisfying to me is watching the relationships that have developed over the years between Swarthmore College students and children growing up in communities of the Chester Housing Authority. It's a beautiful thing to watch. Students come through here often, and they provide friendships and relationships that aren't the type that aren't normally found in our communities. They work together, they help each other out, and I think your students motivate our kids in some respects to aspire to be like them, and hopefully the result is they work a little harder in school and make going to college one day part of their goals.
As Steve mentioned, I'm in my second year here at Swarthmore. I'm coming from University of South Florida in Tampa. So my research areas basically are racial inequality, both in the U.S. and in the Caribbean. I'm really interested in questions of income inequality, legal issues that people of color and Black people in particular face, both in the U.S. context and in Latin America and the Caribbean. So my work kind of is situated in those areas. Currently at Swarthmore, I teach classes on Intro to Black Studies, also Intro to Race and Ethnicity in the U.S. context, courses on race and ethnicity in the Caribbean, Latin America. So really, in line with my research, is kind of these fundamental questions of how can we explore and investigate these questions of inequality that we see, in various parts of the world, in the U.S., in the Caribbean, et cetera.
So I guess one way of looking at this conversation of why do we need Black History Month kind of points us in a direction of inequity or inequality, because what we're talking about is a narrative, and we're talking about a shared narrative, and how some parts of, as Steve, you put it, some of that stuff isn't in the mainstream. It isn't part of the normal curriculum. And so we have to find a way to interject to make history more balanced. Edlin, what do you think of the idea of inequality as it relates to history?
Well, I think there are a few things. I think the first is that history is, and this is kind of as the old saying, right? History is always told from the perspective of the victor, right? And given the particular history of this country, right, we're saying 1619, where I think the language is like 20 some odd Negroes were brought to, brought to the U.S., trafficked really to the U.S. So we start with this foundation in this country, and everything since then forward is kind of a European perspective that's really just ignoring the history of Black people in this country, the history of Indigenous people in this country. And so when you think about inequality, even the idea of what's valuable to be taught or learned is unequal, right? There's inequity in that in and of itself. Not to mention the other questions about who lives where and what schools they have access to. That's a whole different conversation, right? So I think it's really layered when you ask it like that.
You said European, and then you talked about trafficking, and even language like that helps us to adjust our understanding of history, because Europe, of course, is made up of countries. We talk about Africa, it's made up of countries and different people coming from different places. And we never get an opportunity to really dig into it. And then there's this thing of what difference does it make? Because I think that's part of what this conversation is about too, is like, what difference does it make? What difference does it make?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Whether we say, for example, that the history of the U.S., history of Black people in the U.S. begins with slavery, with people as slaves. And I always like to teach in my classes that we don't say slave in my class. We say enslaved, people who were enslaved. Something was done to them that brought them, that put folks in position from being regular humans that could have been in agriculture, could have been farmers, could have been priests, could have been anything, and to a position of servitude. And that something is happening there, right? So there's an action happening, and I think it's important that, like you were saying, the language that we use is precise, and we need to say that folks were enslaved and not just existing as slaves in and of themselves, right? So it makes all the difference, I'd say.
Yeah, on that point of that language point that you just made, I'm actually glad to see that is really catching on. As I listen to people talk about those times of enslavement, they're saying it that way rather than the traditional way that we all got fed in our history books, slavery as some kind of an institution that was worthy of legitimacy. So I have to say, I'm feeling like that is spreading well through people's dialogue.